Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I am Victoria Tubb, the Product Manager for Marketing and Law, and just a few housekeeping notices before we start. So this session is being recorded and will be shared with participants and all of those who've registered, along with the slides afterwards. You have all been muted and we have put your cameras off for privacy, but please, we would like it to be as collaborative as possible. So do add any questions that you have in the chat to the session, and we have time at the end for those questions. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Ayesha Owusu-Barnaby. She's a senior lecturer at the University of Hertfordshire and author of a new first edition Principles of Marketing digital textbook. And this is at the core of this webinar. She has also recently contributed case studies to the forthcoming Global Marketing 9th edition, which is authored by Sven Hollandsen. So I'm just going to pass over to you, Ayesha.
Thank you so much, Vicky, and thank you to everyone for joining today to hear more about the principles of marketing, and in particular I'm going to be talking about case study and our, if you like, typical student audience, which is Generation Z. So case study, I thought when we were talking about what I might discuss in a webinar around the Revel, I thought that case study was a really good thing to start with, because it's a signature pedagogy. It's one of the ways in which we teach our subject, one of the ways in which we introduce students to the ideas and the application of marketing. So that's why I've decided to speak about that, and I'm really pleased that you've been interested enough to join the session. So I'm going to just, please bear with me 1 second. Okay. Okay, my apologies. Okay, so I'm just going to begin. So in terms of what I'm going to cover, I'm going to say a little bit about me. I think probably had a little bit of a bio, but I'll say a little bit about me. I'll talk about the Revel. I'm going to talk about the audience, as I said, Generation Z, and then I'll talk about how we've approached case study for the product. So I will say a little bit about me, a bit about Revel, talk about our audience, and then talk about case study. And as I said, hopefully share some insights into our way of thinking, and also bringing in some of my experience in terms of teaching principles of marketing, which I've done for a while. So I guess that sort of takes me into a little bit about me, which is what I will talk about now. So the image on the cover, if you like, of Principles of Marketing is very much, anyone who knows me knows I love cake. But also I thought it was quite an appropriate image, because I do think about the introduction of students to marketing very much as building up a series of layers in order to enable them to understand the subject. I have been teaching principles of marketing in various forms since about 2010. Before that, I worked in marketing for about 15 years. So you can do some calculations and see quite how old I am. And I've been very lucky, actually, in my career that I've taught most aspects of marketing. Sorry, I've worked in most aspects of marketing. So I think that's what gives me the kind of foundation to develop something like the principles. I've worked in public sector, I've worked in private sector, I've been self-employed. I've done most things, and I've taught the subject to 16 to 19-year-olds, to people, to adults starting a new business, and even to agency staff who are not, haven't studied marketing as a degree subject through to masters. So pretty much most audiences. So again, I think hopefully that gives me a little bit of credentials for doing this. And I've taught in different types of institution as well. So I've had Russell Group students, had, as I say, college students, and I currently work at Hertfordshire, which is a post 92 university. So I think that side of things gives me a bit quite an overview as well. So that's a little bit about me. And if there's anything that you want to ask me at the end or put in the chat, please do. So something then about the Revel. I'm so sorry, I jumped a slide there. Okay, sorry. The one thing I wanted to just say about the Revel, we talk about it as being divided into topics, not chapters. Yes, so something about the Revel. It's 12 topics rather than chapters. And the idea of that is that you can deliver it in the way in which you want or need to. You can dip in and out. Of course, it's cross-referenced because it's all about the principles of marketing. But we kind of took that approach rather than kind of saying chapters, because it's about hopefully your students, your learners immersing themselves topic by topic, and at the end they've made up the cake that I referred to, the the layers of the cake that I referred to at the beginning. And the aim of it, in terms of the design, was very much to lead with illustrative content, and the use of the interactive devices about helping to, of course, immerse the student, but also to help balance the what they need to know with what they can do whilst they're learning about the principles. So, it's aimed at first year undergrads, but also non-cognate master students. So master students who maybe haven't studied business or marketing beforehand. Okay, so I thought I would have a little bit of a play to kick us off, because I know that some of you have posted questions in advance of the session, and I know that some of you have some questions around artificial intelligence, and I will return to that at the end of this. But I thought to kick us off, we're talking about case studies, we're talking about how we tell stories for Generation Z. So I thought I'd have a go at asking two platforms to give us a little steer. Okay, so the first thing I did was I asked ChatGPT to tell us a little bit about what a marketing case study was. And hopefully we can all broadly agree that why lecturers use case studies. It is about giving some real world application. It is about giving bridging the gap between theory and practice. So I couldn't disagree with ChatGPT in that respect. And I also thought I'd ask Copilot, and thankfully got quite a similar answer. Detailed analysis of specific marketing strategy, campaign, or initiative that a business has implemented. And this, I liked the fact that it said it serves as a narrative that documents the real world. So you've got that real world element in there. And then, as you can see from the last sentence, although I haven't included it on this slide, Copilot and ChatGPT actually went on to give me an example. ChatGPT asked me if I wanted an example, Copilot similarly, and I was able to produce something. Now, I will come back to that at the end, as I said, because I know that some of you have questions about the incorporation of AI. Okay, so I think it's important that we think about our audience. So who are we talking about when we say that we want to discuss generation? Who are we talking about when we talk about Generation Z? There are, as I was saying, as marketers, we need to be very careful about our definitions. We need to think about our sources. I'm using the Pew Research Centre's definition, and they suggest that Generation Z was born between 1997 and 2012. I put a question mark because other sources will perhaps say Generation Z ends at 2010. As we often tell our students, as long as we're clear about our sources, that's fine. But we know that this is the age group who are typically coming into our institutions at the moment. And understanding them a bit is important. So they are digitally and technically connected mostly. And I am talking not just about students in the UK. Of course, not everyone is as connected, but increasingly we see that across the world, that younger people, even if they're not using laptop computers, for example, they're using their phones, and they are connected to each other. The other thing that I think is important to highlight about this generation, if that's how we're going to refer to them, is the context in which they are living their lives. And for myself and colleagues, one of the biggest things that has impacted on them is COVID. And one of the things that one of the ideas that I often refer to when I'm thinking about young people is this idea that comes from these authors, Sabo and Derry talk about this. Duffy talks about COVID as having had an asteroid effect. That it's a huge impact on these young people. The young people that we're teaching at the moment have been through a lockdown at a very crucial point in their lives, a very crucial development point. And I think, and certainly colleagues have observed, that this has changed some of the ways in which they engage with us, the way in which they engage with each other. And we see the impact of that when we're trying to teach them. So the term Generation COVID has been used, and whether you agree with that or not, I think it's important to understand that the pandemic has had a significant impact, and we need to address that as in our learning, really, in our learning design. Okay, so the other thing that is quite key is that we are working with young people who come from a wide range of backgrounds. We have home students educated in the UK, and lots of students from around the world. So they're coming to us with a range of backgrounds in terms of what they've studied, but also a range of backgrounds in terms of their learning traditions. So, in the UK, we particularly will focus on critical inquiry and, encouraging students to question and to challenge. But that's not necessarily the case for some of our students. And I've had conversations with students where, they've literally said, why you and your colleagues all talk about this, this critical thinking, critical writing. We don't have that. I won't mention the country, but he said, we don't have that in our country. That was a conversation with a specific student, but it's that kind of idea. So thinking about the international dimension, and I believe that there are participants on joining this session from around the world. So we do recognize that there are differences in learning approaches. And, in the Revel, one of the things I've really tried to do is recognize that sort of difference, notwithstanding that we're teaching the same subject to these students. So that's been part of the development challenge. So so focusing on the sort of challenges that we face, but the student's perspective, if you like, I think is really important. And getting them to engage was one of thinking about the ways in which we could encourage students to engage was one of the challenges that we set ourselves. It was one of the reasons for the development of Revel. I got involved because I had taken part in a focus group where we were talking about the fact that students do not like to read long form, They don't want to speak up in class, and this is pre-pandemic. So, those were the challenges that we were already trying to address when we started this project.
So one of the things that came out of the early research, which was with lecturers and with students, was around this area of uncertainty and kind of students not being sure about anything. And certainly, if I use the UK as an example, they've come through school, they've come through college, they come into the university environment and they're not sure. And, this is a direct quote from a student, that they find sometimes everything is all a bit overwhelming coming to university, bearing in mind, as I say, that certainly for first years, they might be studying this module in their first semester, and there's a lot going on. So what we hear from students is there's a lot happening for them, and they don't know where to focus, and they want us to help guide them with that. One of the things that I hear a lot from students, and some of you might recognize, is, can you show us an example? And there's some work by Nicholas that kind of supports that idea, that students want us to structure their work, and we want them to think for themselves. So therein lies a challenge. I think that they also want us to they're also afraid. They want us to show them the way because they think there's one answer. They're afraid of getting things wrong. They want a list of things to do, and if they do all of those things, they'll get all of the marks. And that is, again, sometimes to do with their learning experience. That could be in the UK, GCSE, BTEC, but in other places as well. So, that's the student perspective coming from me and my experience and my colleagues' experience, but also it comes through research. So getting them to talk about things is really important, and getting them to see that there are options. And actually, that's one of the areas in which the mini sims that form part of the Revel provide that kind of opportunity to kind of do something and make a decision, and let's see what the outcome is, and that helps to kind of build students' ability to do that. So Nicholas also tells us that these young people value speed over accuracy, which I think is a particularly interesting finding in research. So they're not sure what to do, but they also want to get it done quite quickly. So in the game of speed versus accuracy, it's 1-0 to speed. And that's something I think is important for us, because we may have we may have expectations of their learning where we think that they all want to be academics like us. And I think I might suggest that that is not necessarily the case. University is the step towards the job or the career that they want, not necessarily into academia. So what we have to be is facilitators and not lecturers in that sense. And in fact, that also comes through in Nicholas's research, that that's what students want us to be able to do. So a little bit of insight, I hope, into kind of where our young people are when they meet us. Please, by the way, do feel free to comment on that, to agree or disagree. If your experience is different, then please do share, and there's going to be plenty of time to talk at the end. So what I want to do now is to move into just talking about the ways in which we've tried to address some of these elements in the Revel, and just to hopefully illustrate some of that. So I think that there are a number of things that we can do. And one of the first is, I think, constantly inquire. So asking our students. One of the things that I've tried to make sure we have is familiarity. So trying to meet the students where they are with the case studies is about getting them to see things that they know a little bit about already. And I remember when I first started teaching, what was a Principles of Marketing module, but the title of the module, which I've always really liked, was Marketing in Everyday Life. And that's very much the kind of ethos that we've tried to take. So, here you've got Uber, which all of us, again, Uber is around the world, so it's familiar. Vinted may not be in every country, but it's a familiar site for a lot of our home students and some across Europe. Festivals, the Glastonbury, I believe the Glastonbury Festival's case study example in the Revel is one of the most popular, because I guess music is something that most young people can identify with. And again, it's literally, it might be based in Somerset, but it's a world stage. KFC, again. And these are all examples of case studies that are in the Revel. Chelsea Football Club, it's a home club, but it's a national enterprise, as is, Fortnite, the game. And just to mention, gaming is one of the areas in which I have wanted to include within the Revel, particularly to engage some of our male students, football as well, but football is kind of both. The balance in terms of male-female is not something that I was trying to say must have one that appeals to boys and one that appeals to girls. It's not really about that. But gaming does tend to come up when you talk to students, and it comes up more from male students. So, having that kind of thing in there is really, really important. I do other things. I have an induction exercise, which, from the student's perspective, I'm asking them in the classroom to get to know each other. But what I'm also doing is building up my knowledge of the brands and the potential stories I can tell them based on the things that they know and love or hate. Actually, I'm making mental notes all of the time. So I would definitely say get to tell you their brand stories. When I say to them, ask someone about their favorite ad, or something that they like on TikTok. Has anyone bought anything on Etsy or one of the platforms? But I'm testing their knowledge, their usage of and their understanding of their world, and really trying to capture that so that later on I can link what they've told me to what I'm going to be working with them on. So very much the preparation for the development of Revel and now the e-publication has been about checking in with students, asking them questions, and creating a kind of potential source of material based on what they say. I do subscribe to the periodicals, and I quite often will get ideas from articles that are in those periodicals, and I'll test those out with students as well. So that would be my first kind of point. Find out all of the time what they like. And one of the things we often say with students when we ask them to talk about target audiences, they always think that they are the only target audience that exists. But, in this instance, they are the audience. So that would be my first point. And that's definitely, been a key part of developing the sources for case studies in the Revel. Okay, so the second thing is bite size. And you might think that this is a little bit about pandering, because it's generally accepted that young people don't like to read long form. Of course, that is a generalization. When I've asked students, what length of reading do you find most comfortable? When do you kind of put something down? When do you get fed up of reading? And I've had answers between 5 pages and 20 pages. So it is going to vary by individual and by their previous learning experience. But again, this is an actual quote from a student. Do I really need to read the whole chapter? And with the Revel, one of the things, again, another of the things that we were trying to do was to be really succinct. So it's not a print volume, but if it were printed, it would be probably quite a bit shorter than a typical textbook, because that was part of the point of it, that there was more doing than just reading. There is more doing than just reading. So chunking things and allowing the students to be able to dip in and dip out. I think that the lecture tutorial model is one that, talking to colleagues in other institutions, is starting to change as well. Certainly here at Hertfordshire, our first years now don't have lectures and tutorials or seminars. They have workshops, which combine the two things, but actually give us much more flexibility and more time to do the interactive stuff, and then intersperse it with the kind of knowledge elements. So I'd be interested to hear if others are doing similar things. But being able to pick up and put down is definitely something that we were trying to do. So finding ways of breaking up what in old money, if you like, would just be text has been part of the objective. Okay, so the next thing is managing the spotlight. I think our young people are scared. They're scared, going back to what I was saying about COVID, about the age that they are and their experience. Being singled out is a difficult thing. And, really trying to find ways to encourage their learning, but means they don't necessarily have to fully put their head above the parapet, is, we think, really important. And certainly within the platform, the opportunity is there for for students to undertake individual tasks, but then also as lecturers, we can make those tasks collaborative if we want to. So I would very much say mixing that kind of thing up is a good idea. And of course, when we have them in the classroom, we can, as well as using technology, we can still do the things that we always used to do. There's no reason why we can't combine learning with flip charts, use of flip charts, use of post-it notes, to encourage collaboration before they start entering things on the platform, or get someone at the front of the room to speak. So I would say definitely address their fears and their reluctance by managing the amount of time that we put our learners in the spotlight. Okay. And then I would also like to say and suggest, and this links to the first point, is building familiarity. So another quote from a student: "I feel more confident if it's a brand I know." So if we ask them to conduct some analysis, if we ask them to write a report, if we ask them to produce a presentation, they are, it links with that idea of, can you give me an example? And I use these examples. They are all featured in, they're featured in the Revel, but they're there because they've come from students. Actually, the H&M is in the Collinson. But it's, that familiarity is helping to give the students a comfort zone. And I hear that a lot. I don't like stepping out of my comfort zone. And it's almost a kind of immediate fallback. But I do think to a certain extent they believe what they're saying. So, let's keep them in their comfort zone for as long as we can until we get them to the point that they are willing to step out. And as I say, bearing in mind that this is a principles module, a resource for a principles module, then I think it's quite helpful if we can keep them within their comfort zone. They can understand, take on what the concepts are, and then we move them on. And by the time they get to level 6, or if they're master's students, they're writing their dissertations, they feel comfortable, they understand the concepts, and they see how it works in Zara. And I've just had the students do the exercise where they look at a couple of weeks ago, when they look at the segmentation, Inditex, the parent company of Zara. It's great that they can go and have a look, to go onto the website, they have a look, and they can, even just by looking at the images of the different brands, they can start to understand what segmentation is all about. The customer for, Massimo Dutti, who I refer to as Zara's big brother, is slightly different. And, so they know the brands, they can talk about, and they will talk about their ideas if they're looking at things that are familiar. So that is definitely something that I think is important. And then alongside the familiarity piece is diversity. So I think diversity comes in a number of forms. But again, if we're talking about case study, if we're developing examples, or if we're asking our students to understand, if we're asking them to engage with kind of key concepts, then I think showing them things that they will recognize is important, particularly when I'm working with international students, which is most of the time. I think it's important just to, I can talk about IKEA, but there is no reason why I can't get an image of IKEA from Dubai, or, Starbucks in Egypt. It's not difficult via the internet, but it gives students something to identify with. And I do find that using the bigger brands, the worldwide brands, works better when you have a mixed cohort. And so you will see that there is some of that within the Revel as well, because, we can always fall back to Coca-Cola, but there are lots of other examples. And we don't have to cover every single nation in the world, but I think showing that we understand, we might be here in the UK, or we might be in our particular country, but showing our international students that we understand there is a perspective based on where they are from is really, really quite important. So that, if you like, is a summary of the things that have driven the content, and the way in which I'm suggesting we can tell stories to Generation Z, the way in which we can encourage them to buy into those stories and engage with the principles that sit behind case study. Those are some of the ideas that I wanted to kind of share with you. So I kind of, in terms of, I guess, summarizing that, making marketing stories work, I would say, one, we should constantly find out what works for them. We need to chunk things so that they feel comfortable and will not be overwhelmed by the tasks that we set them. We don't want, we have this expression, rabbit in the headlights. We don't want to startle them. We want them to, we don't want them to be scared. So helping them to have a little practice, helping them to do something individually in small groups, actually, I think, is what will help them to engage in more detail. And that idea of building familiarity and remembering that our students are all different is where we're coming from with the Revel. And I hope has given you a little bit of insight into the resource. So I think we have some questions. And Vicky, if I come back to you.
Yes, thank you, Ayesha. Thank you very much indeed for that summary. There's been lots of questions in the chat as well as pre-recorded ones, and also lots of support in the chat. So thank you very much for all of your comments. I'll actually start with the questions in the chat, if I may, because they're kind of very directly related to what you've been talking about. And I think one of the questions was around how do you get the students to discuss if they don't want to speak up in class at all?
I think so. That goes to that point really about putting themselves in the firing line, in the spotlight, and for me, it is very much about giving them the chance to test their ideas in in pairs, for example, or with the people that they are sitting with on their table. So very, very practical things. I do tend to say to students when they come into my classroom, if you sit by yourself, you're probably going to have to move, because you're going to need to speak to someone at some point. And I don't, I always try to get volunteers. I don't think we will ever get all of them to speak up, but I do find that giving them something to talk about, something to do, and letting them talk to each other, you can actually get quite a noisy room. And I don't worry anymore about everyone not speaking up, as long as when I walk around the room, they are talking to each other. And, one of the, I do very, I think, practical things. And I always say, start by, hello, my name is, because they maybe haven't spoken to the person who's sitting on the table. But also scaffolding the conversation. So giving them very specific things to do. And then sometimes that might be about having a conversation and then recording something on the platform or in some other way. If you're using a VLE, I will often set up things that they can then, write a couple of sentences or tick a box or do something. So they've had a chat, they've come to some consensus, but then they share their ideas in that way. And I think that would be my response to that. But certainly, I don't think we will ever get all students to speak up. Some of them just won't. But get them talking to each other is important.
Thank you. That's a very full answer, and I think it is sort of mirroring some of the ideas in the chat about developing their confidence, getting them to talk to each other, participate, and talk in groups as well. So one of the other questions was around the groups, and you mentioned talking in pairs first, but when you were talking about Hertfordshire, I think there was a question in the chat about how big the class sizes are and how the seminars work. If you want to talk about that in a bit.
So the workshops that we're now doing at level 4 are about 30 students. Some are slightly bigger, some are slightly smaller, because it depends on the mixture of programs on a particular module, but I would say roughly 30, but sometimes slightly bigger. And so that makes for, you have to be quite efficient to get around the room, but it's doable. It's much more doable in a 2-hour session, because, if you have an hour, you really can't spend a lot of time with each group. But if you've got 2 hours, which is what we now have, there is time to talk to each group and get them working on things.
That's fantastic. So I think some of the questions that we had before the seminar, you've answered a little bit, but I'll just put them to you. And familiarity, I think, here is one of the key things. So one of them is, why are Generation Z students passive in lectures, which I think we've covered a little bit, but then also what type of cases are interesting for Gen Zs?
Yeah, so I think they probably do sit quite closely together. So I think the passive element is, I think there's, well, as I said, I think there's an element of fear. I also think that one of our challenges is sometimes we do have young people in our classrooms who are not quite sure why they're with us. And they're the most challenging. And that's why I think, to answer the other question, it's really important that we spark their interest. So, and I've just been having this conversation with some colleagues at lunchtime. Our young people are at university for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's because they absolutely wanted to be there. A lot of the time it's because there's an expectation, family-wise, to go to university. And I've just this area touches on my PhD research. So, the influence of family is very strong. I also think, because I'm going to assume that mostly we as participants here are teaching in business schools. And I do find from talking to students that sometimes they choose business because they're not actually sure what they want to do. If they choose something like marketing, then they have a little bit more clarity on their future. But particularly if they're studying marketing within a business program, they're kind of hedging their bets. So they sit back a little bit. And that's where I think we do have the opportunity. If we find out that they love Nike. Nike always comes up, by the way, whenever I ask a group of students. And sometimes I think they say Nike because it's the first brand they think of, and then Apple. But even if that's the case, at least we have something that they know about. I always look at shoes. I look at young people's shoes and I kind of say, okay, you're wearing Nikes, you're wearing Adidas, and I kind of make a joke about it. But I think building that engagement by trying to get them to see what they're doing, how they're living in the world of marketing is really, really important. So hopefully that answers the question, or at least gives some thoughts. It's not an easy one. It's an ongoing challenge, and every cohort is different. We will get, we'll have a group of students who come through who are just really active, and to be frank, even from group to group, so workshop to workshop, it can be very, 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 very different. Some students are just very engaged. Sometimes it's even about where we are in the semester, I think. We get tired. And I think students get tired sometimes. So that again means give them things that they know a bit about, give them things that they can recognise.
So I think the last two questions are around AI, so I'll probably take them together. And
Okay.
One of the questions was, what is the main barrier to AI usage? And then finally, how to motivate students to have their own creative thinking process when they rely on AI tools to do it for them.
Okay, so I had a little play. I'm going to I'm just going to reshare my slides, because I was aware that there was an interest in AI. So hopefully you can see my screen again.
Yes, thank you.
So I just thought, as I said at the beginning, there's some references there, by the way, for those of us who can't get away from sources. I thought I would just have a little play. I haven't used AI to write a case study. And I had a chat with my lovely colleague Eldad about writing a case study using AI. And I thought I'd have a little play just to see what Copilot would give me if I put some simple question in. And this was the kind of initial outline that I got from Copilot. So it came up with, I just said, what is a marketing case study? It said, would you like an example? And I said, yes. And so it gave me a structure. And then if I go on to, it runs over 2 slides, but, it talks about what a company has done, what its strategy was, what the implementation was. So the headlines are there. You can see results, customer feedback, and then visuals. And talking to So Eldad, he talked about, what you are going to get from the AI depends on what you feed it. So if you ask a question, you will get an answer. If you give the platform more data, you will get a better answer. So I think the challenge of working with AI, if I could address the question in that way, is really about how we decide that we are going to manage that. And I think expecting students not to use AI is not realistic. And in fact, I've spoken to a couple of content managers, who are out there doing this stuff, and they've said, I say that recently I've spoken to a couple of content managers and they've said, well, yeah, I use AI to create an outline for the material that I'm producing, and then I produce that material. So my point being, if we assess students by asking them to write an essay or write a report, we make it very easy for them to produce something as basic as this, using Copilot or whatever else. But this would not get them very many marks, because we can look at it as lecturers and say, well, it's very basic. But what we can do is teach them that AI might give them an outline, but the value will be in what they can add to that. So why not assess them by asking them to show us the prompts that they use? Because that will enable us to see whether they understand key concepts. So if they ask ChatGPT to demonstrate geodemographic targeting within the case study, or if we put some statistics from Statista into that they have selected, we can grade them based on the judgment that they made about what data to put into AI in order to create the case study. Because case studies are, as I said, the whole idea of a signature pedagogy, it is something that we do. It is a way of teaching, and we do tend to write case studies in a particular way. So the format is not really what it's about, it's the content. So my argument would be, give them this and say, right, now make it better. And that for me is the opportunity for using AI.
Yes.
That would be my response. I hope that kind of addresses the point.
I think that covers it. And we have one more question, hot off the press, around the case studies and developing them. How do we access such case studies to develop our understanding of these brands, the familiar brands?
Do you mean other than getting the Revel?
Well, that would be my answer, but I'm sure you have other ideas.
Sorry, I'll stop being sales girl for the moment. I have to be honest, when I started working on the Revel, a lot of the ideas for the case studies came from things that I was already using. And the point I was making about constant inquiry is where I get the ideas. And I have a folder into which, the weekly or daily newsletters from Marketing Week and The Drum and ft.com and The Guardian they go into that folder, and then I go through and I look for ideas, and some of those are have made it into the Revel. So those are my original sources, if you like. I tend to try and avoid, not least because of the rights and permissions issues, I tend to try and avoid single sources. I don't always avoid it, depends what I'm doing. If it's something that's going on a VLE, then obviously, we have to be careful. But I tend to collect multiple sources, or I'll use an article as my starting point for a piece of research, to build the case study around that. So that's, and as a marketer, I live in the world. So accessing is really about looking at my world and trying to bring that closer to the world of my students. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, I think so. So I think that's about it. lots of support as well in the chat, and you can probably see that now, Ayesha, now that you've stopped sharing.
Yeah.
And so it just leaves me to say thank you to everyone for participating today. It's been great to see all of the chats, and we'll be sharing the slides and the recordings with everyone later this week. So thanks again, Ayesha.
Okay. You're welcome. Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat. I've just somebody asked a question about the shoe thing, but it's been answered. So yeah, look at their shoes, trainers and that kind of thing. But yeah,
It's a great
thank you
icebreaker.
everyone for joining. Thank you.
Thank you.